Okay, thank you, everyone. I tend to be conversational rather than dictating towards you. So if you do have questions or if there are comments you have or things you want to, some burning desire to say something, please do interrupt me and we can have that back and forth. That's completely fine. So this is typically where things start for me in terms of what do I do? And this is a question that has been asked of me many times, and I don't really have the best answer for it even now. So what I've tried to do today is to set up this talk in a way that I can give you the philosophies behind how I actually do my work, and then you can kind of see the different pathways in which that kind of takes in terms of how I do my work. But I would then always come back to this is always grounded in social justice in some kind of way. So I tend to do a lot of things. I'll speak primarily about the sound work today, but I also work in film. I also have to write because that is a job requirement. But there's lots of different things that I do, but I'll focus on the sound aspects as much as possible today. But this kind of framing question is something that is typically asked of academics all the time, and I find it always if I'm honest, very difficult to kind of like answer because I don't really go into doing work thinking about, oh, this is what I necessarily want to do today. It's more about being driven by some kind of motivation that is coming from somewhere on the outside. And then what I then try to do is figure out how I am going to respond to this through the means that I have. The means that I have as an academic is using sound and using different various forms of artworks. So that is what I do. And I think underneath all of this is my way of trying to think through how am I positively contributing to the world around me today as much as humanly possible. And so that is what I try and do as much as possible. So the questions that I usually ask myself and try to think about as it relates to my practice is how do I activate my work? So the things that I have, the things that I make, how do I make it in such a way that it is doing something that feels active to me in its relationship to the world, in its relationship to the problems of the world, in its relationships to the things that I am passionate about. So I often ask myself, how do I make my work activist? How do I do activist work through the kinds of work that I'm doing? And this is often involved in trying to think through the use of sensory media. When I say sensory media, I just mean media that is embodied, is speaking to all of the senses as much as humanly possible, that allows audiences to feel embodied in whatever that particular media form is. How do I make sure that those things that are being created feel as if you are being confronted by image, confronted by sound, confronted by visuals, confronted by performance, confronted by immersion, confronted by subversion often, in order to ask questions about infrastructures of inequality. So that is kind of the space where my work often sits. Often, I say often, all of the time. And a part of where that comes from in terms of my own background is from this space here. So this is me as a very small child, and these are my parents here. This is my brother who's sitting beside me. And so often what I'm trying to think of when I'm doing work is how do I connect my own everyday lived experience to the work that I'm producing, or in terms of how do I, or because, let me put it this way. When I was growing up as a rebellious young man, the things that I read that were inside of, so you can kind of see the books behind you there. You can't see the titles, but I can kind of give you a vibe of the kind of books that were in my parents' house. It was Fanon and Walter Rodney and Audre Lorde and these kinds of books. And a lot of Mills and Boon's books as well. My mother was very much into Mills and Boon's romance novels, so she would read all of them. So in the background were all of these different kinds of books, which I would then read. And So I grew up being influenced and impacted by the words of Fanon, influenced and impacted by the words of Audre Lorde, these kinds of thinkers, these kinds of writers. But at the same time, I'm listening to, I was a big hip hop guy, so I'm listening to Public Enemy, I'm listening to The Roots, I'm listening to these kinds of groups at the same time. So then for me, as I'm reading and listening at the same time, my thinking and how I'm kind of like putting these things together is that Chuck D of Public Enemy is as significant of a influence on my thinking as an academic as Fanon is, right? Or if I'm reading Merleau-Ponty or Deleuze or one of these kind of authors, or I'm at the same time I'm considering that, well, Black thought of the roots is as important to me as these writers and these thinkers. So why do I need to make a separation between what is happening at that, often what people consider to be pop art level, low art level, and what is considered to be these higher level thinkers and academics? So my hope over the course of time has been to try and bridge that gap between what is considered academically significant and what is considered to be not academically significant. And this doesn't necessarily always involve pop culture figures, but it also involves people who are influential to my life. So when I'm writing and I'm quoting and I'm making citations, I'm also thinking about how do I cite my grandfather at the same time as I'm citing this author? Or how do I cite a memory at the same time as I might be citing, you know, some kind of higher level academic thought that is expected of me as an academic to make those citations. So inside of this space, in terms of how it influenced me and what you're kind of going to see in terms of the pieces of work that I show you, is trying to close that gap between those two different spaces. This is significant and important for me because what I always want to bring to the table are those voices that are often considered to be not as important, but are the voices that we hear around us all of the time and that are impacting the things that we do. So how do I bring those people to the table? Now that I am at the table, because I'm at this academic table with everyone else, how do I bring those people along with me to, and not in a way that feels as if I'm being extractive, but in a way in which I'm trying to, not necessarily convince people, but to ensure that everyone knows that, no, all of these voices that are on the table are a part of the same group of voices. Whether or not we've decided these are part of the canon or not, this is what my canon is, and my canon includes something that my grandma told me 30 years ago. I have to cite this. Or some snippet of a song that I heard yesterday that's going to be quoted alongside all of these other things. So inside of this space is where I'm starting to kind of, I put the kind of like term decolonial there, but I'm thinking about the process of how do I kind of like collapse these spaces, bring these spaces together, put everything in the same room. A lot of that has to do with what I consider to be responsibility that I have as an academic. And so that kind of responsibility is a part of what always features in my work. So I tried to kind of distill this down into two different ideas, and which I'll try and make sense of for you now. So when I say revealing the terms and conditions of lived experience, so one thing that I struggle with every day as an academic is the knowledge and understanding of my own complicity in the shit that is going on in the world, right? I'm going to assume I can curse, and that is what's going to happen now. So if I consider the spaces that I occupy as an academic, where my salary comes from, where my research funding goes to, all of these different spaces aren't necessarily places that I am 100% comfortable with or even 50% comfortable with, but this is the world in which I kind of live. And so as I stand here with my MacBook Air and my iPhone on the table in front of me, I have to be aware at every instance that these instruments that I'm using in order to kind of tell this particular story means that I am complicit in a part of an infrastructure that is doing things that I don't agree with, or I might feel are completely the antithesis of what I would believe as a human being, but I'm still up here with the MacBook and the iPhone and the Adidas shoes and the Zara pants and the Uniqlo sweater and all of these kinds of things. I'm still up here doing all of those things. So this kind of complicity is something that I'm always trying to tackle with and to reveal and speak about to other people. What this then also means is that my sense is that in this particular moment in history, none of us can really escape that complicity because we're all a part of it in various ways. So when I talk about the terms and conditions, I mean, if you think about when you are installing an app or using something or signing up for something, we don't necessarily read all of those terms and conditions. We skim right past it and just say, accept here, because it's dense and it's 6, 7, 8 pages, and we decide that we don't have the time to do that. But what it kind of like reveals is that we are signing up as a part of this process of being in these worlds to things that we don't necessarily agree with because of convenience, because of the world in which we live in. And so my work is always trying to bring those things to the forefront, that we need to think about these issues differently, we have to confront these issues differently, we have to reveal what is behind and hidden in these infrastructures as much as humanly possible. And then also, as I kind of alluded to before, what I always try and do is privilege those sensory and political experiences of those persons who I might consider to be disenfranchised, underrepresented, marginalized, not brought to the table. That's where I am always coming from in all of the work that I'm doing. So if it's writing, if it's audio, if it's film, that is the kind of mindset and the underpinning in terms of the philosophical aspect of where I'm coming from in all of the work. So if I had to say, what do I do? I would say this is what I'm doing, no matter what the work is and where the work is coming from. All right, so that's one aspect of what's happening here. Connected to this is this other history that is available. These are the Maroons, which my mother was born in Jamaica. I grew up in Jamaica. I was born here in South London. We moved when I was 11, maybe. Moved to Jamaica when I was 11. So the Maroons were, well, these Maroon communities were these settlements inside of various countries that were impacted by the transatlantic slave trade. So you'd have Maroon communities in Southern America, Brazil, Jamaica, lots of places in the Caribbean. And these Maroon spaces were basically where runaway slaves would go to, form their own communities in these spaces, and create new worlds and new communities for themselves amidst what is happening around them. So rest of Jamaica is happening here. In these little kind of like pockets of spaces, people create their own worlds with their own languages, their own kinds of political experiences in these spaces. And so this idea of being in these areas is an interesting way of, or at least a way in which I've tried to navigate the aesthetic of what it is that I'm doing. That is trying to set up experiences, sonic experiences that are going to pull people out of what is happening here to have them think about things in a different way happening over here. So when I think about installation work or these kind of things, I'm trying to think of sound as being a space where you can be brought out of one way of thinking into a different way of thinking. And I'll speak a little bit more about how this connects to Maroon and Maroon culture. But in terms of Maroonage itself, these Maroon communities were characterized by this kind of freedom that they've kind of built for themselves, which I think is significant in terms of how this creates new ways of seeing, new ways of being, new ways of understanding in various spaces. And so what I'm always trying to do in my work is to use these practices of subversion, use these practices of metaphorical Maroonage as a way of thinking through what it is that I'm trying to do in these various spaces. This idea of being subversive is always very important to me because I like to kind of play around with ideas and play around with different ways of looking at things. I'll show you, this isn't my clip, but I'll show you a clip of what John Canoe looks like. John Canoe is it's a Caribbean practice of performance that is connected to this guy on the side here is what you would call John Canoe, one of the John Canoe performers, and they would mimic the enslavers in some way and build their own dances and performance connected to it. So I'll show you a little bit of that. So it gives you a little bit of sense of what that kind of, give me 1 second, what that resistance work looks like in terms of performance. So this will be versions of cultural resistance within those kind of different spaces. So a lot of what I'm doing is drawing from these influences in terms of trying to create versions of this idea in my other kinds of work. All right, so let me jump past you. All right, so here, marionage is an open social spatial relation involving a societal transformation resulting from the struggle to institute a distinct concept of freedom and to ultimately establish new ways of being in the world. And what I kind of draw from this is, how do I create work that is going to speak to new ways of being in the world as much as humanly possible? So what I am then trying to do is to pull from that materiality of marionage into a metaphor of it to look at applications of this kind of idea into the work and thinking about marionage as it says here, an affordance of imagination. So if I connect this to a social justice issue, such as police brutality, if I'm doing some kind of work around police brutality, how do I create different spaces for understanding this issue that is going to move people away from... Do people remember when there was the Black Lives Matter stuff and people did black squares on Instagram? Right? So there's a period of that whole period when everyone had like a black square on Instagram. That didn't do anything, right? So my question then becomes, that's not doing anything. What can I do that is going to make a difference in this particular realm of social justice? And so it speaks to this idea of using marionage as a way of connecting and thinking through ideas of creating things that are going to cause different ways of dealing with it. Mark Anthony Neal, somebody who I've worked with before, speaks about this idea of fugitive archives, of taking bits and pieces of what is around you in the world to create something else. The examples that he often draws from and looks at are, I assume everyone's seen Moonlight. Like he looks at Moonlight as an example of this, or looks at Killer of Sheep as an example of this. So the last clip I'll show you of something else will be a clip from Killer of Sheep, so you can kind of see what that production of a different space of understanding looks like on film. So let me just show you.
This bitter earth, well, what fruit it bears, what good is love? That no one shares. And if my life is like the dust, ooh, that hides the glow of a rose, what good am I? Heaven only knows. Lord, this bitter earth, yes, can be so cold. Today you're young, too soon you're old. But while a voice within me cries, I'm sure someone may answer my call, and this bitter earth, ooh, may not, oh, be so bitter after all.
So in terms of what is happening sonically, right, you are being drawn from the reality of outside, where they're outside on the steps, they move to inside, where you as an audience, or we as the audience, are put into this sonic space where all that you are hearing is Dinah Washington, this bit of earth, watching this couple dance very slowly, and you're kind of like trapped in that reality. So you come from the reality of what is happening in the world to this different space. And then once you get to the end of the song, you can hear the needle come up off the record, she goes off to the window, a return to that reality. So what I'm always trying to do in terms of how this operates as a marinage space is in that particular space where you are kind of there with just them dancing, you are being brought from one place into that place where you are being forced to feel through whatever is happening inside of that sonic space. So what I'm always trying to do is create that space. Whatever it is that I'm doing, I'm trying to make sure that people are inside of that particular space where they are being taken to some way, or hopefully being forced to think about these issues in a different kind of way. So this I talk about as being sound as a marinage space, or the sonic as maroons. And this is the baseline of how I organize my work. And this means creating spaces, sonic spaces that are alternate, subversive, personal, communal. This is broken down in various ways. So I'll break it down in terms of how I have organized it. So in terms of how that works in sound, I'm thinking about this as phonological sound. So that is just the sound of the things themselves. So if you think about words like Wakanda and words like Zion, just those sounds in and of themselves carry some kind of power with them, and this I'd call a phonological sound. There's also the kind of technical sound environment that is being worked with. So if you think of how this operates in jazz or in dub music, or as Sneed, he talks about this idea of practices of repetition and of the cut, where you are, something else is happening in the sound that is bringing you into different ways and different kinds of understandings. So in terms of repetition, I'll show you this Solange clip because that will give you a sense of repetition and how that talks to and influences what I'm doing. But in each of these examples, whether it's the James Brown example, or if it's Burning Spear example, or whether it's a Solange example, they are doing something differently with the sound in order to kind of create a different way of trying to think through these things. So I'll give you the Solange clip because that will come back to something I'm going to show you later.
Saw things I imagined. I 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 saw things I imagined. Things I imagined. Things I imagined. Things I imagined. Saw things I imagined. I 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 saw
So I'll come back to that, but I'll stay here. So that's an example of how this marionage works in technical sound. All right, so here I'll start to talk about my own kind of stuff. So the two main places where I'm using marionage is in marionage as it relates to sonic spaces and marionage as it relates to sonic imaginaries. So I'll start in the spaces. So there's also a lot of these physical spaces that exist. Sunrise Architectural Institute, Dungeon Families, Dungeon, Paisley Park, lots of the different spaces and examples here of how physical space itself is being used as a part of the sound practice in order to draw people's attention and ideas and thinking towards different environments. This is something that I played around with recently. This was a performance that we put together at Transmediale early in the month in Berlin. Myself and S.A. Smythe, Liz Gray, Rebecca Pakua-Korang. Echoes of Care was a performance piece that linked to ideas of haunting and Black ways of care. I'll show you a little bit of that here, but what happened was that there was a combination of sound, performance, voice, and intervention by SA that then created this kind of, it's easier for you to see. So inside of the space, this is the foyer inside of Hackaway in Berlin. We created this entire space which had an altar there. I'm giving a performative sermon essay here on the ground. That's with a theremin at that point. And we had vocal performance happening, a sound intervention happening as well. So all of this is kind of happening as a way of these four different persons coming together to investigate the ways of Black care. On this table, which is the altar, we had different items, photographs of people who had passed away. And so we created this whole performance that spoke to these issues, raised this understanding of what it would look like in terms of performance of care. The theme for Transmediale this year was closeness and proximity. So the ideas that we were working with was creating these close spaces of performance as opposed to the proximate crowd who was there as an audience. So I'll give you a sense of what that looks like here. We don't yet have the professional recording, so I'll show you something that folks recorded on the phone.
Black people believing. I believe in Black people believing. We are the ghosts of other stories. We were spectated, but we are spectator. We are spectre. We were hunted, but we are hunter. We are haunted. I am haunted. I am haunted by memories of my grandma's roast chicken sandwiches made with only the leftover grease. We called my grandmother Auntie Donna because Caribbean families reject labels. Every year we pour brandy at my grandfather's grave because it was his favorite drink. We call them ancestors, not because they came before, but because the before comes to us. My great-grandparents are buried in the backyard of the home they owned. No Ouija board is needed to talk to them. We can just go outside. My grandparents are buried in my memories. No seance is needed to reach them. Every breath I have left to breathe carries their spirits.
So that gives you
Black people.
Sorry. Here's a different version of it here.
Every breath I have left to breathe carries their spirits. A clinician and a practitioner. Yemiya brewing bath. Fill the bath with water to cleansing practices as needed. We are community. We are Octavia Butler's Souls of Paradise. We are Aikwe Ama's Beautiful Lands. We are Marcus Garvey's Lions of Black Star.
So this was a half an hour piece that kind of went on for this particular long, so people kind of came into the space, watched us have this kind of performance. We, at the end, asked people to participate in carrying the dirt. So there's lots of this different kind of interaction with what is happening with this proximate crowd, with the closeness that is happening here with the performers. The thinking being that if with the different kinds of performances that are happening here, what we are then showing is different ways of how care is performed within these communities and what it then looks like in order for that care to be exhibited through sound, through movement, through voice, through action, through performance. So for that half an hour, this is what happened. What we had hoped to then try and do is to create this space for that half an hour to cause people to think beyond what is happening in the world outside them and think with us for that period of time about what this means, why this is significant, how it connects to care and such things. This is connected to my recent project that I'm working on now, which is called In Loving Memory of a Symphonic Celebration of Black Lives, which is connected to the idea I was telling you about before with the frustration with what is happening in the world around me as it relates to police brutality. This project is connected to a collections of videos that is on the New York Times. So in the New York Times, there's a collection of videos on the website that are called Black Lives Upended by Policing. The raw videos that sparked outrage. What it has then is a list of, I think, 27 videos on the website that just kind of go one after the other. So it's kind of like a playlist of police brutality videos, which I found to be a very bizarre way of displaying awareness raising around this particular issue. So the question then became, what do I do with these videos? It's 32 videos. What do I do with these videos? How do I activate this issue and these pieces of media to do something with it? And so again, working with this idea of performative eulogies, collaborative symphonic creations. This is what the project design of this all looks like right now. So it has a much more of a religious feel to it, with periwinkle and daffodil are two flowers that are connected to graves of the enslaved. So that's something that would be put into the project itself. You can see different movements that are connected to what is happening with the project. So it will be similar to what happened, well, not exactly similar, but similar to what happened with Echoes of Care, in terms of these different performers, practitioners in the same space, trying to create alternate, subversive space for understanding, thinking through these issues that are separate and different from what happens in online spaces as we connect to and relate to issues and ideas of police brutality. So here, I talk about it as being a way to turn trauma reactions into reparative possibilities. So this is something that I'm always kind of like working with and dealing with as an idea. All right, I'll turn more to the more specific sound stuff now. So as I mentioned before, Marinage as sonic imaginary is the other kind of work that I tend to do. This often comes through my mixtape work, which is a curation of sound and visuals that are meant to express and embody resistance and survival, both historical and contemporary, and kind of challenge these dominant narratives of what is happening with. Is your hand up, Maddie? Yeah.
I was just curious as to why, in the situation of the Memory Project, was there a desire to tie the religious aspect?
Because I'll tell you what happened. I was trying to figure out what to do with it. I knew that I was watching, because what happens is these videos get shared. The idea of these videos, and this happens now with certainly a lot of Palestine now, where we got a lot of these truly awful videos. The idea behind the videos is to raise awareness about things that are happening, and historically that has worked. In terms of, if we think about the history of the civil rights movement, what worked for the civil rights movement, not entirely, but in part, was you're able to see what is happening, this raises everyone's awareness, everyone then says we have to do something about it, and then things get done. That doesn't really seem to work in the same way anymore. So what we just have now is just videos. And the applications and software that we use to kind of like view these things change the way in which we interact with these videos as well. Because we can skip past it, we can set things to not necessarily pay attention to it. There's lots of different mechanisms we can do. So this is what is happening to me around this issue of police brutality. I'm thinking, what do I want to do with it? My first instinct was, I'm going to take these videos and rather than make people turn away from it, I'm going to make you pay attention to it. And so my first thought was, I'm just going to make the horror of this situation as apparent as humanly possible and just remind people this is terrible. And so what I did was I cut all these videos together and made the playlist like basically a long visual mixtape of just police brutality. And then I showed it to a few people to say, here's what I'm working with, let me know how it works. And they were like, this is fucking horrible, dude. We cannot sit through this, right? People were crying. I was sharing it with like close friends who I work with and say, hey, I'm trying to work through this, what do I do with it? People had to like call partners to kind of like watch it with them. So that's obviously not working, right? So what I've tried to do artistically has failed and failed spectacularly, which happens, but it hurts more when you're causing people pain. So I then don't want to cause more pain. Then my grandmother died. And so I went home to Jamaica, we were at the funeral, and I'm in the funeral and I'm thinking, this is what people need. Faced with the horror of death, people need a chance to grieve. People need a chance to feel through these kind of things. And so I'm in this space watching kind of like people go up and share memories about my grandma and that kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, weird place to start having like artistic kind of like inspiration. But I'm in the church thinking, oh yeah, rather than do something that causes pain, let's just have a big funeral that celebrates the lives of these people. So that's why I kind of like turned to be more religious, because I'm drawing from what then happened to be the real life that happened around me. Me, myself, I'm not a particularly religious person. Well, I'm not religious at all, if I'm going to be honest. But I understood that in that moment, what was required for the community around me to deal with the death of this one person was we needed this ritual of a funeral, and that's what works for us to process these kind of things. But what happens if you are a part of a community where you want to then have a funeral for all of the people that you know who have passed, right? Because let's just go back to the 32 people from the New York Times videos. I don't personally know these people, but each one of those people, I feel it because I am connected to these people through my lived experience, through my history, through my skin color, through my sometimes maleness, whatever it is, but I'm connected to these people. So I feel every one of these deaths. And I understand that my body in the world is potentially going to be treated the same way as these other people. So how do I process the passing of those people? How do I deal with those feelings? So my thinking was, I'm just going to turn this into some kind of a funeral process. Rather than it being a funeral, we then made it into, we're making it into a celebration of life, so it then becomes more of a, not a grieving for the dead, but a memorializing of their lives in such a way that we are remembering them for who they are through their lives, as opposed to what happened to them at the very moment they were taken from us. So that's the thinking behind it, if that makes sense. Yeah, thank you for your question. Jump in.
I just want to ask a question on consent of the people in those videos that obviously are being attacked, and then people are publicly filming it. Where you stand as an, or have you probably thought about an artist of then using videos of people which aren't able to consent from being in them and then being mass circulated, because it's really.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of discussions with that. I mean, a part of what I've been experimented with in terms of the videos has been, I'm gonna forget the name of the feminist filmmaker who took pornography videos and then used nail polish to paint out the women out of the videos, so that all that was left was just the guys, as a kind of like comment on framing of women's bodies inside of these kinds of films. So the first kind of thing I started playing with when people kind of like come in with this idea was, well, can I take those videos and pull people out of it and just leave the aggressors? So that is one of the ideas that we're potentially working with. Also have been thinking through the idea of actually contacting the families of the people who are involved and just to tell them, here's what the project is. Can we, have some kind of discussion about it, whatever it is. But yeah, I don't have a settled answer in terms of what is actually going to happen with them, but it's something that I'm thinking about and looking for solutions in terms of doing it. But yeah, it's a serious question, something that I have to work through, yeah. And that's always, in a lot of what I do, that is kind of like one of the main questions is that I'm tackling. I will one day do happy work, but I'm currently in very negative kind of like bad things. So that's always going to be something that I kind of like I'm thinking about. Cool, thank you. Yeah, so it's kind of like connect those questions to kind of like where I'm going here is that with the mixtapes, then what I am trying to do is similarly give voices and sounds to these particular situations that are happening. Oftentimes this happens as accompaniments to chapters in books. So Anthem was a book by Shauna Redman about political anthems, and she asked me to create a mixtape to accompany the book so that when you're reading the book, you're also kind of like imbued with the sounds of what this might actually sound like. Similar thing happened with the mixtape as Maroon for Mark Anthony Neal. Similar thing happened with Futures of Black Radicalism, which I'll give you little snippets of each, not all of them, but some of them, so you can get a sense of where this all goes. These mixtapes were actual mixtapes, so these are what they actually look like. And it's important for me to put them back onto cassette to kind of play with the idea of cassettes have their own subversion history already, just as a tool, but you can kind of see them in where they are there, and then I'll play you some music. So this is from Mixtape as Maroon. You'll hear the sound of a Maroon, a bang player happening at the beginning, and then mix in some Greg Tate happening afterwards.
Today I need to speak first on black ontologies, bleak and blue musicologies, oblique and interstellar strategies, dark matters, and those even darker, gravity-repulsing, universe-expanding energies. If you're not a reality, then whose myth are you? In whose light do you shine? Your own or some other mother's blood-stained son? For as long as my people have been shackled to this land, they have refused to believe that a captive body automatically and autonomically meant one had to have a captive imagination, or that to be treated like a beast of burden was to be unburdened with intellectual, poetic, visual, musical, military, and ethical impulses.
after the end of the world. Don't you know that yet? It's after the end of the world. Don't you know that yet? It's after the end of the world. Don't you know that yet? It's after the end of the world. Don't you know that yet? It's after the end of the world. Don't you know that yet? It's after the end of the world. Don't you know that yet? It's after the end of the world. Don't you know that yet? It's after the end of the world. Don't you know that yet?
Flash forward 200 years into the future. Next figure, another hoodlum, another bad boy scavenger poet figure. He's called a data thief. 200 years into the future, the data thief has told a story. If you can find the crossroads, a crossroads, this crossroads, if you can make an archaeological dig into this crossroads, you'll find fragments, techno-fossils, and if you can put those elements, those fragments together, you'll find the code. Crack that code, and you'll have the keys to your future. You've got one clue, and it's a phrase: mothership connection.
So, the thinking with the mixtapes are, well, I'll do a full circle kind of thing. That picture at the beginning of me with my parents, in those spaces where I used to make mixtapes as a kid. So, just all of my favorite songs. I'd actually invent a radio show and do a whole top 10. It was unnecessary, but I enjoyed it. But these are ordinary things that I used to do. So again, going back to what I said at the beginning, how do I activate these ordinary things to make them become something? And so this is a part of that process of, okay, this is something that I do. I DJ, I make mixtapes. How do I make this activist work? So it becomes a matter of all of these different sounds that I could be creating as just entertainment. I'm using the affordance of how people listen to music, which is usually now an individualized process of, I see my man at the back with headphones on top of his head, is usually, I'm going into my own world here and I'm listening to my thing, right? How do I get into your head so that you're listening to my thing as well? So I'm using these processes, these tools to say, I am going to raise awareness or speak about an issue through language that you understand, which will be music and sound, but cause you to think about these things in a different way, hopefully, or cause you to care, or cause you to move away from inaction to doing anything, something. And so often that is kind of like the motivation behind these mixtapes. I'll jump over this one. I'll go to this one. This was Pleasure Liberation, which was speaking about Black love and the revolutionary and radical spirit of just being loving and finding pleasure.
We need, each one of us, to deal from a place where we are most powerful. And what I wanted to talk about today was the erotic as a source of that power. For once we know the extent to which we are capable of feeling that sense of satisfaction, that sense of fullness, that sense of completion, we can then observe which of our various life endeavors bring us closest to that fullness. The very word erotic comes from the Greek word eros, the personification of love in all its aspects. When I speak of the erotic, then, I speak of it as an assertion of that creative energy empowered, the knowledge and use of which we are now reclaiming in our language, our history, our dancing, our loving, our work, our lives. And because of these attempts, it has become fashionable to separate the spiritual, the psychic and emotional away from the political. in the way that my body stretches to music, opens into response, hearkening to its deepest rhythms, so every level upon which I sense also opens to the erotically satisfying experience, whether it is dancing, building a bookcase, writing a poem, making love, examining an idea. For once we begin to feel deeply all the aspects of our lives, we begin to demand from ourselves and from all our lives' pursuits that they feel in accordance with that joy which we know ourselves to be capable of. In other words, our erotic knowledge empowers us, becomes a lens through which we scrutinize all aspects of our existence.
So, last one I think I'll speak a little bit to is, this is the chapter that we wrote for Futures of Black Radicalism, which connects to Cedric Robinson's book, Black Radicalism, where she spoke about these ideas of Black radicalism, to be honest. And so what we wanted to do was to create this kind of playlist, a listening party of the sounds that we think would represent what those theories are about. So part of what I'm always trying to do is to take what is, to make you feel through the things that are theoretical. So I'm less interested in kind of like writing about theory. I'm more interested in about how do you actually feel this theory inside of your body. And so we came up with this track list of songs here, put it together on a mixtape. You can kind of see the various ideas that are working through this particular book through the songs themselves. Try to pull from lots of different eras and put it roughly in a chronological order. I'll play you just the intro of it.
The first moment I want to draw your attention to
aesthetic of the mixtape I've also used as a part of my visual work. So here are a few examples of my visual work. I'll show you the Solange piece, which is about repetition and mantra, and I'll show you a little bit of the Space Invaders piece, because that will give you a sense of what it looks like in terms of mixtapes being visual.
Saw things I imagined. I 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 saw things I imagined. Things I imagined. Things I imagined. Things I imagined.
You're gonna have a hard time learning that.
Saw things I imagined.
Okay.
I saw things I imagined.
What are those things?
I saw things I imagined. I saw things. I imagined.
What did you see?
Things I imagined.
Salon.
Things I imagine. Things I imagine. Saw things I imagine. I 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 saw things I imagine. Things I imagine. Things I imagine. Things I imagine. Saw things I imagine. I 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 saw things I imagine. Things I imagine. Things I imagine. Things I imagine.
By repeated practice, anybody can correct the mind. That is the power of repetition.
Focus on your breath. In slowly, out slowly. In slowly, out. The same pattern repeats within every one of us. We're creatures of rhythm and repetition. Rhythm and repetition. Rhythm and repetition. On and on and on and out and out and out.
The elements of my body are as one with the infinite cycle of creation and all matter in the universe.
And now my heart knows no delight. I boarded a train, kissed all goodbye. I boarded a train, kissed all goodbye. And now my heart knows no delight.
Deleuze writes that in every repetition, something distinct occurs. Newness is inscribed in every moment. Each repetition is something new in space and time. It has no equal or equivalent. And every repetition creates something new in the mind which contemplates it. It's the very difference in every repetition that accounts for change, for newness, for evolution, for creativity.
Are you there?
Are you there? Are you there?
Are you there?
So the thinking is, shut up. The thinking is, I could just write about this and say, this is what this music does, this is what Solange is doing as an artist. I could just write about that. My preference is to say, or is at least to show you, here is what it, all of the things that I would say in text, here is what it actually looks, feels like through sound. And I can use the mechanism of a mixtape to show you and have you understand that theoretical perspective. So the idea is that this is supposed to operate and work like that kind of text. This is the and a lot of that happens through curation, remix, repurposing, those kind of things. This is the original Scientist Meets the Space Invaders from, I'm going to say 76 and guess. From 76, what I then did was remix that, turn it into Dreadstar Meets the Space Invaders. Dreadstar is my DJ name. In the background is, so you can see the old background is just this blue that's here. The new background is, that's Gaza that's happening back there. And then I put a version of myself in front of it there, and then created, how do I explain this one? A video game version of it with Space Invaders put on top of old.
The conqueror writes history. They came, they conquered, and they wrote. Now you don't expect people who came to invade us to write the truth about us. They will always write negative things about us. And they have to do that because they have to justify their invasion. In fact, you don't know anything about any place until the white man gets there. Until the white man comes to any place, nothing lives. It's only when he comes and says, "Boof, I've discovered you, now you exist," which is ridiculous.
So this is a installation. What happens is I place this Space Invaders on top of these old Pathé Empire videos, then created the mixtape that speaks to this issue of colonial history, invasion of space, settler colonialism, those kind of things. And then lastly, I'll talk a little bit about kind of like radio, which is kind of where I'm moving now. So this was a radio show that I took part in, speaking about Palestine as well. And so now the experimentation and the movement is moving into radio as a means of experimenting as well. Actually, let me play a little bit of that.
Hundreds of feet below sea level, through an arid and scorching valley, flows the River Jordan. Its course runs from north to south, from the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea. Between the Jordan and the Mediterranean lies Palestine.
All right, so in conclusion, let me come back to you. Mouse, where are you, mate? Come on. Get me back. Yeah, so in conclusion, I think what I do is what Neil says here, which is create moments of sonic and emotional disruption, reflecting the quiet resilience and subversive practices of the Maroons. So yeah, basically everything that I'm doing is in response to the world around me and hoping that I can get people to care about these issues. I don't know that I expect everyone necessarily to have their work do that in the same way that I want my work to do it, but I do think that everyone has some kind of responsibility to, at the very least, from the position that they are in, whatever it is that they do, to make the world a better place, no matter what it is that they're doing. And so that's kind of basically the very basics of what is behind how I operate and do my work. Yeah, that's me. Thank you. And if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much for that lecture. That was really brilliant, and yeah, much food for thought. Very moving. Thank you so much for sharing. So yeah, maybe we can use the mic for the questions. I know that a few of you had some questions in the interim, but yeah, we'll use the mic here.
Could you just expand a bit more on your mixtape process, like how you choose different sound sources and mix them together?
Yeah, so in essence, it's if somebody comes to me with an idea or they come to me with a chapter, they send me the chapter, I read it, and then start to kind of like formulate ideas about, okay, what is it that I'm feeling? What is it that I'm hearing? Where do I want to draw sounds from to put this all together? Other times it's just an idea that has kind of struck me and I want to think my way through this, but typically it's just listening to hours and hours and hours and hours of music and hours and hours and hours of sounds in the same way that I would have made a mixtape back in the day anyway, which is I want to put this sound here, I want to put that sound here. And then it becomes a matter of curation and arrangement, of thinking through, is this the vibe that I want? Is this the feeling that I want? Does this express the ideas that are coming from the piece of work that I'm kind of like drawing from? And then it is just really DJ work, in the sense that you have to think about, does this go well here? Does this go well there? How am I putting these sounds together in order to create a fullness that feels like this is the space I want people to be in? Again, I'm operating from an idea of I expect people to be listening to this as individuals. So I'm trying to give you something to listen to. I'm trying to make sure that you are hearing all of this. And so what I want to do is try and express a full idea, but I'm still often going through the, what is that movie? John Cusack owns a record store. It'll come to me in a second. But he talks about in that film what it is to put a mixtape together, and you do have to think about, how am I going to start this? How am I going to bring people in? How am I going to get out of this? What is going to be track number 2? All of these things kind of like come into it, which is why the aesthetic of a mixtape is important to me, because I am using that same process to put these sounds together, but I'm doing it for a purpose that is not just for entertainment. It's for academic theory or for social justice movement, whatever that is. That answers your question.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I feel like pairing that aesthetic with the more conceptual or like kind of meaningful side can be really difficult, but I feel like based on the examples you showed, it was really powerful. So cool. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
More questions?
Sorry, I'm just laughing because we're always asking questions. I suppose I wanted to talk about, I've had a random week of being in loads of these meetings about how to talk about activism, but I suppose as a practitioner, how you've developed your own practice, or maybe teaching students that are engaging with quite distressing, maybe personal experiences, how they safeguard themselves through sharing that throughout the process, because I can see it in the final product of it's done really beautifully through metaphors and mixed media, so it's handled different where you're not at the forefront physically, but I wonder kind of throughout the process kind of things you have about because it is emotionally very vulnerable, which it has to be, but how do you protect or look after yourself, like self-care throughout that, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, there's a practical element, which is where, so for instance, with the police brutality project, built into the project in terms of its development and in terms of how we're writing up funding, is we will make sure that anyone involved in this project has access to medical help, whatever it is that is going to be a part of that self-care package, so to speak. So that's something that we built into the project itself to ensure that should you need it, which I imagine people will, here are these resources that are available to you that we've made available as a part of the process itself. In terms of me by myself or other people who I know working in similar kinds of ways, it becomes a matter of just kind of like awareness of actually what you're feeling. A lot of this is just how you would consider and think about any kind of self-care process, is that you have to be aware of what is happening with you, or aware of what your body is telling you, be open to kind of accessing and seeking help if you need it, or accessing and seeking care if you need it. But for the Echoes of Care project, where the four of us were working together, we were just kind of like, we would check in with each other. And to be honest, everyone was bawling after we finished. So we just were in the room together, just kind of like sharing that moment with each other. But I don't think there's not a kind of like magic answer to it. It's the same answer I would give anyone for anything that they're doing. Be mindful of how you're feeling. Make sure that you have support around you. Make sure that you have access to that care should you need it. And just be kind and patient with yourself as you work through this process. And also, projects don't have to, if it's not working and it's not actually making you feel as if this is good for you, then stop and do something else. It's not worth causing yourself harm in the long term just for the sake of art. So that's the main thing I would say.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the amazing talk as well. Very inspiring, very much related to things I'm interested in as well. And I had a question that Daisy asked, which was about sort of how do you approach these, because there are heavy topics and heavy explorations in many ways. So basically, how do you keep yourself lighthearted throughout that? And I guess where light kind of, what kind of role does that kind of light-hearted or bright approach takes place in your process, or how do you, I guess avoid complete darkness in some way? But similar.
Yeah, I think play and subversion is useful. That you can. So, for instance, idea that I'm also working on now is using an ice cream truck. We call that a truck over here? We call it a van, like a van? Same shit. Ice cream thing. And pulling the sound out of it and starting playing some other stuff, just going through neighborhoods, just playing some other probably very politically active things, but taking that item that everyone has a particular relationship to, has a particular joy from, and doing something activist with it. But in that way, that for me then becomes fun, because I'm doing something that is subversive, I'm doing something that is unexpected, but I am still articulating the things that I actually care about. But then also, we had this discussion in Berlin a couple of weeks ago in terms of efficacy of different social justice actions. And I can't remember what movement it was, where must have been some anti-fascist movement, where people were on one side of the road and just mooning people. So there's one fascist thing happening over here, and another group of people on the other side of the road just mooning them. I'm like, yeah, that's perfect. You are ridiculous, therefore our reaction to you should be ridicule, rather than always kind of doing things that are super heavy.
Yeah, I think humor is probably the answer, and but then it's hard to, I guess, maintain humor if you're dealing with these things. And it's like I find myself, and the reason I ask that is because I feel like quite serious today, and it's like it's because it's been quite like a week of just serious things for me. And I'm just like, I need to do something, I have my ways, but I'm just curious as well. I was curious about that.
I mean, humor and joy and love and pleasure and all of these things are resistant to the hellscape in which we live.
That's it, yeah. I mean,
so therefore, access those things. And it's not as if humor, people shouldn't think of humor as being separate and apart from doing the work, so to speak. These are parts of what makes, not it necessarily makes the work bearable, but in the face of all of the trash that is happening out there, if you're able to find joy around you,
I think that's it, isn't it? It's like that's an act of resistance in itself to be joyful and and actually just wanted to ask you, because there was this piece about pleasure and liberation that we listened to. I just wanted to know who's the author of that piece. It was I really wanted to listen to it later.
That was Audre Lorde who was speaking. The pleasure one. Yeah, that was Audre Lorde who was speaking.
How do I spell it? Andrew. Yeah. Oh. Okay, perfect.
With no Y, yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Cheers.
It might not be a fully fledged question, but would you maybe say that like irony as a form, as a sort of slightly more specific form of comedy, is one that's like, I don't know, I suppose for me even still it feels weird, the idea of tying like negative things that are happening and exploring those with like the word humor. Like the word humor seems like I kind of feel like I reject that as an association quite quickly, but I know that my way of dealing and looking at and approaching things that I disagree with is nearly always with an ironic subversion. And like, I don't really know what the question is. I was just kind of curious as to whether you see a separation between other forms and headspaces of comedy and like irony. I often find irony is like a really great, personally like satisfying way of dealing with people and associations and things that are happening that you don't agree with.
I mean, sure. I mean, that's I mean, yes, but also no, in the sense that everyone is coming from their own lived experience and their own perspective and their own skills and their own whatever kind of like visions and methods that they have available to them. People are coming from that with their own thing. So I would never like seek to limit someone to say this particular method that you're using is less valid than another method, because someone might, I mean, also I'd probably put irony in the humor category anyway, but if we're talking about it from an artistic perspective, one could argue that one particular genre of music is less bent towards kind of like this kind of work than another form of music, but this is the music that you do, this is the art that you do, this is the practice that you have, this is the thing that is your thing, and whatever that thing is that you're bringing to the table, I try not to be too precious about it, I try not to be too preachy about it, I try not to tell people to do the things that I do. I just ask people to consider the things that you do and to be mindful of the things that you do and make sure that the things that you do are beneficial. So if that is, whatever that is fine to me. And I mean, going back to the kind of discussion on this side, any joy that you can find in this world, take it and hold on to it and recognize it for the power that it has and recognize it for the ways in which it enriches you as a person, and that in and of itself I find to be a resistant action. Even if that is telling dumbass jokes, whatever it is, slapstick comedy, whatever it is, all of this can be activated to do something more than just being what it is. So yeah, I'm kind of like, all tools are available. Use all of them, because I don't know, the world is real shitty right now. We should use everything that's available to us as much as possible.
Absolutely, thank you.
Homie at the back had a question. This.
Hi, thanks. Sorry, I just need to think about it. There were so many things that came up throughout your talk to do with history and time. You talked about repetition. There was a quote about repetition, something being renewed every time it was repeated. And obviously, hip-hop creation, dub, and mixtapes are about edits and cuts. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on time as a medium in your work, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is something I always consider, and something I would maybe want to do a lot more with in terms of playing around with that idea of time. Oftentimes for me,
well, you already are, is what I mean.
Yeah, but I don't know if I do it in a way that I'm necessarily thinking this is how I'm considering time in it. But certainly, I'm typically thinking about it in terms of memory and those kinds of conceptions of time, how I'm bringing forth voices from one period and bringing it into this period, or having those conversations across generations. So I think in those ways I'm very careful about, because I am still an academic and I am still a teacher, so there is an element of I am trying to ensure that I'm presenting knowledge to people. So there's reasons why I'm bringing in thinkers and voices from 50s, 60s, 70s into the same space as more modern kind of like voices and speeches, because I want people to understand that there is a collapse of time, there is a collapse of history, there is a way in which we need to be able to see ourselves in this longer conversation about who we are as humanity and who we are as a part of this world. So I think in those ways I'm often seeking to collapse time rather than expand time, but I am also interested in the patience element of things of, no, I'm going to make you sit through this and really feel it in kind of like real time, which was part of what I was exploring with the putting those 32 police brutality videos together. Was, no, the 30 seconds in which you can kind of like dismiss this or feel that kind of moment of rage does not really give you the story of what this means. You have to understand the long history of this kind of injustice, which means I'm going to put this all together. It just didn't work in that way. So I have to find a different way to express that same kind of sentiment. But yeah, it is always important to me. I think I'm now realizing that I do work with time a lot. But
yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
That was yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Thank you for your talk. I found that very inspiring, especially in terms of creating spaces for certain emotions, for example, grief in your work. And I'm thinking in terms of activism and making spaces for holding emotions, as in, I think about it how we are kind of being desensitized to all of this stuff. And I wanted to hear your thoughts, and maybe if you have any other works of yours or something that you could share when it comes to creating those spaces to actually process the whole thing and not kind of what I'm trying to say is how do you curate something like that in your process? Maybe it will pop back into my brain. I kind of blanked. Sorry.
No problem. I mean, I've shown you kind of like snippets of things today. So I think what I would say is that experienced in the kind of like the fullness of what they're supposed to be is, for me, is a part of that moving away from desensitization towards this kind of like embodied kind of like feeling of all the way through this theoretical process, through whatever this particular idea is, that is what I ideally want to come out of it. Is because what I'm always kind of like seeking to do is to push back against desensitization, because I think that numbing process is a part of the problem in terms of why things don't necessarily change for the better. So my thinking at all times going into all of the projects is, how do I make you feel the theory? How do I make you feel how do I make you understand the things that are inexpressible, but feel it in your body in a particular kind of way, which is then really is, I mean, I've played music through these kind of like speakers that I hear, but really what I want is for you to be able to, it's going right into your brain from here, and so that you are actually feeling all of this kind of like sensation in your body in a more immediate way, because what I do want to do is to kind of like resensitize you to this particular issue, to these particular voices, to my understanding of whatever is happening here. I think that is, in essence, kind of like underneath everything that I'm doing, whether that is building out like an actual space so that your body is really within those spaces, or whether it is putting something in your ears, or whether it is kind of like having you look at something. It's taking the spaces that you would usually inhabit anyway, which is watching and listening to things on your phone, listening to music, all of these different areas where you are already kind of like doing things, and just activating those spaces to just do more. Because I'm trying to basically meet people where they are. I'm more interested in doing something in places where people actually go, as opposed to, let's say, a museum installation. Because you've then made something separate and relatively exclusive that has a very particular kind of audience to it, where I'm more interested in, all right, radio. People listen to the radio. What can I do with radio? People eat ice cream. What can I do with ice cream, right? As opposed to, let me make something for like fancy installation kind of work, which nothing wrong with people want to do fancy installation work, but that's just not me. I'm more interested in community-focused, grounded kind of work in that kind of way. And then all of it, then all of it is about sensitizing people to things that I think are important. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think it kind of feeds into the fact that basically how the social, political, economical structures are right now is to kind of keep people on that brink of not being able to push back, because everyone is so busy with their lives and with meeting the ends that people don't have the energy or time to resist. And if it is with the intent of care and in community spaces, then it makes it accessible. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it was nice how you kind of asked this question about what do we do about desensitization to these issues, and you kind of responded with, well, with my art I kind of resensitize around certain issues, and it's almost like a tuning of, reframing perhaps. There was a few comments on the chat, if there isn't anyone in the room desperate to... Oh, there is. Okay.
Hello. I just wanted to ask you, how do you find people engage with your work with the large amount of short-form content that people consume these days? And how do you, or what is your strategy to get your message in front of people?
All right. I have maybe more hope for people's patience than others, but I also do recognize that I am putting together, for instance, people will sit down and listen to an album, right? But also I'm not trying to make like 2-hour mixtape. I'm doing like, okay, I think people will tolerate like 45 minutes or half an hour. So let me make sure whatever I need to do is distilled into that half an hour, because I'm thinking, okay, so then people say, oh yeah, I listened to it on the drive to work, I was on a train. I'm thinking of the places where people might actually engage with it. But people are, like for instance, people will listen to a podcast, right? So I'm thinking about all of these different ways in which audiences engage with this kind of sound work anyway, and then trying to kind of like reactivate it in different ways. People will sit for ritual because it has its own kind of like rules. So if you come into a space for something that is a ritual, people typically will stay for the ritual. So therefore, if I'm doing something that has more of that ritual bend, then the expectation is that, no, you're coming into a space in which you are going to spend 45 minutes, whatever, watching this thing, being a part of this thing, and those kind of things. So I think it's more just about being aware about what it is that you are trying to do. But also, if you can't sit through it, then I mean, what am I? Well, I have no control over anyone. I just kind of like, I'm doing the thing. Here's the thing. That was my job for today, was to finish the thing and give you the thing. And then people find it. Sometimes they don't find it. They have different reactions to it. But I am always, I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was kind of saying over here. I'm thinking about it from a perspective of how do I take the things that are ordinary and make them different? How do I give new meaning to these ordinary things that people are already doing, as opposed to asking people to come out of their life into something completely different? I'm trying to go into their lives and say no. Because that's where, if you want people to be resensitized or you want people to care, it has to be in the places that they're going to be active every day. It can't be like a one-off kind of event that you've gone to that's going to... No, I need people to care every day. You need to wake up every day and care about this. Otherwise, it's not going to change. So therefore, I need to meet people in those places, which is in your house, in your bedroom, on your phone, all those kind of places, and say, no, here, every day you need to get up and do this. It's on your Instagram too. You scroll, friend, oh, mixtape. Listen to a few minutes, all right, cool. I'm in that space. So that's kind of where I want to be as much as possible, because yeah, if I truly want to impact change, that's where it has to happen. It has to happen in those ordinary places with ordinary people, as opposed to
bringing the discussion to meeting the people where they are.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
Was that also the intent with the space invaders being imposed over the video to kind of like hook attention?
Yeah, I mean, hook attention, yes, but also to kind of like make the point of, if we are talking about settler colonialism, right, that is literally invasion of space. Yeah. So I'm just going to be as, straightforward as possible. Space invaders on top. These two things are happening at the same time.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm not comparing. It was just my thought, because on my feed I started having like radical left propaganda. The left side being explained over like Minecraft run-through videos.
Oh, yeah, that does
so people
happen,
actually pay attention to it, and it just reminded me of that. Someone is not gonna listen to it, but if it's over Subway servers or something like that, I guess maybe someone will listen. But I know yours is absolutely like referential.
Yeah, but not dissimilar to that process of, I need to hold your attention with something that is recognizable.
That was a cool question, by the way. Yeah. But also, so you mentioned ritual quite a lot throughout your work, like the references to ritual. And I'm quite interested in that topic. I've been I've been like playing with ritual as a form, kind of as a performance form, cultural performance form, and I know I can recognize its like usefulness actually, and like the unique kind of things that it brings to socially engaged art or modes of experiencing. So I'm curious because we can see a huge kind of disappearance of rituals in the world that we live in, and I'm curious if you considered at all in what ways you could bring that form back. I mean, I could see even Echoes of Care contains like huge like elements of ritual as well, and that I'm not sure what was the setting of that piece. Was that in a kind of gallery space and people were invited, or
it was in Hakave is this huge kind of 3-4 story kind of like building with not unlike a kind of like university space, and it was in the foyer of one of those spaces. So the options that they gave us were, you can do this in the foyer or you can do this on stage, and we're like, we definitely don't want to do on stage. We want to put it in a kind of the most open public space as human possible, so that people have to walk through it, interact with it in those kinds of ways. I lost this track of what the first part of your question was. Rituals,
it's
yeah.
all rituals,
Yeah. So I think there's formal rituals, and I think there's everyday like living rituals of people doing kind of repeated actions. So on the one hand, I am interested in how you can take these formal, sometimes almost sacred rituals and do other things with them, because I think that forces people to interact with it in very particular kinds of ways. But there is also the ritual of coming to class to listen to a lecture for 2 hours. That is a ritual that you do as, students every day. I'm happy to try and work with something around that as well. That, okay, how do I make this different? Or another thing that I've done, ritual of conference presentation. So I stopped giving conference talks, really, and just go to conferences and just press play on stuff or just do a bunch of weird shit instead of just giving the talk, because I got very bored and tired of just doing the talk. So it just becomes a way of, okay, how do I play around with this process as much as possible to make whatever point that I'm trying to make, or to cause people to think about what would be the presentation in a way that isn't me with a paper reading the paper, because I don't find that particularly interesting. So instead I just go and do, I think once I made a video of a presentation and just kind of like press play, and it was just presentation happening when I was just standing here. So it's those kind of things. I was a student who got in a lot of trouble as a kid, and I'm trying to put that into good use instead of getting it. Well, I still get into trouble, but good trouble.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Because it's like I guess like bringing your art to people rather than asking them to come, so kind of recognizing where these elements already are and trying to work with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in people, so
I
want to do stuff for the people. Yeah. Thanks.
So on the chat, many people have said thank you for the talk. Someone was asking if there was a link to the radio work on Palestine. Is that on your website?
It is, but I can also share it with you afterwards.
Okay, thank you. And Daniel says, High Fidelity is the film.
That is correct, High Fidelity, thank you.
I think. Thank you, Daniel. So one short question from Dion Elizabeth, who said, thanks for your talk. I'm wondering, how do you navigate copyright in your work?
That's one of the good troubles I get into. Don't care. Just do stuff and then get in trouble afterwards. So fair use. But also typically I'm doing a lot of cutting up of things. Not that it necessarily makes a difference in terms of the legal aspect of it, but I am transforming the work into very different things. So one of the challenges I do have with my work is that I like clean work, which means things look and end up feeling quite cohesive, but then it becomes very difficult for you to see the work that has gone into making it cohesive. So you end up getting the kind of like the meal, but you don't see any of the ingredients necessarily. And so that often makes it seem as if I haven't done that much of it, but I've really kind of gone in and like chopped stuff into lots of different pieces and put it back together in various ways, which then, technically speaking, does kind of like get into transformation of work and those kind of discussions. But in the main, I just do and then see what happens, which is, a failing on my part maybe, but haven't got into trouble yet. It's coming.
Oh, okay, hold
on. The thing that you mentioned about way earlier, about how ritual kind of imposes like a pressure, right? Like people are more likely, like speaking more, I imagine, about this idea of the formal ritual, people are more likely to stay till the end or something because of that pressure that's applied by that setup. And I thought that was really interesting, and it leads me to kind of think, like, what do you think the idea of applying pressure to people in moments and in the context of trying to get a message across? Because obviously a lot of the things that potentially, I don't know your work inside and out at all, but that you might be challenging, or that maybe I might want to challenge, are like things that are applying pressure to people. And so it's like, of course you want to share love and give peace, and like that it obviously is a form of rebellion and solving in and of itself, but also, like, I don't know, I'm curious, what do you think about the idea of applying pressure to people, like through maybe the format of formal ritual and such as?
Yeah, I mean, so number one issue for me is whether or not it's going to actually be effective. So if it's going to be effective in terms of the format of whatever kind of like art practice you're doing, then that's the number one thing. If it's not going to be effective, then it doesn't make sense. But if it is going to be effective, then I'm cool with moving in that direction. The second thing is that if there is going to be pressure, so to speak, if it's about something that is a social justice issue, then my focus isn't on the audience's. I care more about the people who are suffering than I care about the person who's going to feel a moment of pressure to participate in or to engage with this practice. Because at the end of the day, you go home, it's fine. It's all good for you. But if it's talking about something that is the negative consequences of lived experiences of a marginalized group of people, then that is what I care about in that circumstance. So I want you to pay attention to those things, I want you to care about those things, and I want to make sure that whatever I'm saying is effective in making you care about those things. But if it comes with a sense of, this makes me feel a little bit heavy, or this feels a little bit like some kind of pressure, you'll live. It's fine. Somebody else is going through it. The thing that is attached to is, for me, more significant. So I always come back to making sure people are attached to reality. Like, this is what is actually happening in reality. As we're having this talk, there's terrible things happening somewhere at this very moment, every moment that we're here. And I'm more concerned with those lives rather than the theoretical pressure somebody might feel relating to a piece of artwork.
Absolutely. Otherwise, we're just in fairyland.
Yeah, you will be fine.
Yeah, of course.
Relatively speaking, but there's bigger things to be concerned about.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. Yeah, I was curious because it is an interest. It almost feels like, I don't know what the word is. I can't remember it, but feels like opposite in some ways of what you assume to be the right thing to do when trying to speak to people, and it depends. Well, it does and it doesn't, and it depends. That's kind of like a pop culture influence, and it's it definitely depends whether you're talking to people about something that they are experiencing or something that is not something that they are experiencing directly as well, right?
I mean, I'll put it this way: I have no investment in holding people's hands and making them feel good about something that's bad. I only have an investment in revealing the bad thing. And so I care about everyone, obviously, but there's kind of like priorities, and my priority is always going to be those with the least. So that's kind of like where my focus is in the work.
Thank you.
No problem.